Situation at the front on February 20th. Let's talk today in more detail about the Bakhmut, Avdeevka Zaporizhia section of the front, and we will start with the Kupiansky-Mansk section of the front briefly without significant changes. Attacks continue in the direction of the turf. In the direction of Yampol beams round Yarolaptiva, but we managed to repel all the attacks, so some more changes not recorded in the northern direction. Clarifications were added along the railway. Perhaps you remember the enemy attacked. We already sorted this out in the direction of the excavation, then we added a red zone. We had this on February 16th of this, published in my telegram, which means there was a slight advance of the enemy, and added to this area of clarification information has been received that he has advanced along one of the forest belts further in the northern direction in an area up to 150 m wide to a depth of up to 270 m. The battles in this area continue, although they ultimately have a positional nature, but still the enemy is pressing in the northern direction. We talked to you. And for the Razdalovka there were repelled attacks for what was then controversial, but here there was partial success in the Bakhmut direction. The main military operations are still continuing in the area of the Popovsky Forest and east of Ivanovsky. They are pressing with large forces. That is if before they attacked with small infantry groups. Now the Russian troops are increasing the pressure, and they are bringing up armored vehicles, which we also talked about with you. On this section of the front we managed to repel most of the attacks. The fighting continues, but again we don't record any new changes, but the enemy is pressing very seriously. We move further to the Avdeevka direction. This will be a relatively short summary of the main points. With front means Lastakina, an advance has been added along one of the forest belts east of the settlement on a section of the front up to 150 m wide to a depth of up to 430 m. Today our fighters from the field received information about what they were attacking, which means with the support of a tank and armored vehicles we managed to repel these attacks, so we are only recording that the enemy has entrenched himself along one of the forest belts, while attempts have been made since the night on the part of the Russian troops to improve the tactical positions. Well, throughout today they continue. It cannot be said that this is the offensive that was spoken about by the Russian troops from Avdeevka, but in any case it is necessary to note one very important point is that additional mining of the territory was carried out, and in the SSU in general a number of measures were carried out that now do not allow the Russian troops to advance as they planned, that is, to enter the operational space after the capture of Avdeevka, because taking the city presupposes an operational space. This was avoided as in Marinka itself when they stopped it, therefore. But still the difficult situation remains. Therefore, these are the changes we recorded on Pervomayskia Nevelskaya. Assault operations continue both on Pervomaysko itself and southeast of Nevelskaya. Now the fighting in the gray zone is moving to the Kirikovsky direction. Victory means look. There are a lot of messages about victory now. They are similar to what we had for Lastikin. That is, there is a lot of misinformation. I'm telling you this, and I'll note one important detail. I'm sure you also noticed this in the comments when I told you about Lastikin 3 more days ago, and 2 days ago something was most likely disinformation. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, it was confirmed all that it was disinformation. You noticed that there were a lot of comments, yes, and not only in the chat and under the video, about the fact that again Russian troops captured and the author is hiding information. This one of the parts of the information war on the part of Russia that it is waging, that is to demoralize as much as possible against the backdrop of the Avdeevka our troops, that is to report that everything is much worse than it is. The situation is complex. No one is hiding this, but also what they are saying on the Russian side in the context of those same days always convince that this is not the case when I convey this information to you as truthfully as possible. A similar situation and with victory means that the enemy is pressing here on this section of the front. This corresponds to reality. we have added changes to the area of the intersection of the dirt road and the highway about 0532 in the direction. Pobeda means that both gray and red zones have been added from the area of the field reservoir. They have advanced to the intersection and there are indeed attacks on Pobeda. The battles are taking place within the gray zone and not only along the section of the road about 0532, but also east of Pobeda. They are attacking from lanes in the western direction. Information about that they took captured part of the village. Part of the village, it does not correspond to reality because in fact the village in general, let's say it's only for streets minimally, and what is stated there about difficult battles is not there. Because if the village goes, then it will go, I would say, very quickly if it falls, but not battles that will be protracted as the Russian side is now presenting on the approaches and there are active hostilities. This corresponds to reality, but the main task now of that disinformation, as in Lastakino, is to demoralize the whole army, because the whole army is also monitored and the enemy's resources are not only ours to convey. Then what? No, this is based on the real situation on this section of the front along Nova Mikhailovka. Without any new changes, Tuva continues to act to restrain. At this stage, the enemy was in the direction of Shevchenko, the village. From him, Russian troops went on the attack in the northern direction. The main goal was to level the front line and further level along one of the forest belts between Pavlovka and Shevchenko. I published a video on my Telegram, which means that the VSSU fighters managed to completely repel this attack. 3 tanks were destroyed, 5 BMP, 3 BMD-4 and 5 MLBKH, and up to a company of personnel Ugladar direction. In principle, it became famous with us 2023 since February, when the Russian troops suffered colossal losses there. As you remember, more than 100 units of armored vehicles when they stormed the city of Ugladar, and in fact the next attempt ended in failure for the Russian troops, although again the forces involved were quite large, taking into account the problems with ammunition and so on and so on. In fact, very effective work on the part of the armed forces, very effective, because this is an atypical reflection of the attack. This was really a massive assault, which means the only added clarification of the gray zone was a small one. Shevchenko was attacked, and clarifications were added in the area between Pavlovka and Shevchenko, but this is what happened to us in the context of the last 3 months, the assault that took place with Shevchenko in the northern direction. I repeat, it reflects the situation as of yesterday, the situation for today with clarification, while in general it was already clear that Ugoldarsky was attacking in the northern direction. But they also tried with Shevchenko, that is to bypass not only the eastern but also to bypass and subsequently managed to repel the western carbon. We move on to the direction of the Zaporizhzhia section of the front in the direction of Rabatino. Active assault operations on the part of the enemy continue also in the direction of the village itself, as you understood from my previous broadcasts, and those statements that were from the Russian side about what I said is not true, that the fighting in the village, that the Russian troops gained a foothold, because I published a video for you both in Telegram, and here I commented on where the Ukrainian armed forces fighters took Russian soldiers prisoner. So they were unable to gain a foothold. This is the first moment, but they continued to carry out assault operations, although no longer on the scale that was previously added. Clarification of the gray zone in one of the forest belts. You and I said that the situation in this area remains to be clarified, which means there was an attempt on the Russian side to break through with armored vehicles to bypass the fortified area of the north and attack Rabatino itself. Flying in with armored vehicles means too we had units since December of that year, which means they remained, and the third unit was not near them in December. It was just freshly damaged. So a gray zone was added due to the fact that, well, in any case in the forest belt the situation is being clarified, because if there were positions there in the armed forces would have been preserved, they would have fought just for this forest belt. But since the attack had already taken place, the attack vector is Rabatino itself, so it's a gray zone and, I repeat, the high pace of hostilities continues. Battles continue both to the south and to the west. Of Rabatino, this is the situation us. Today on the front, I hope I covered the main points as briefly as possible, difficult despite the fact that we managed to repel these attacks. As you can see, the attacks continue under Rabatino itself and are trying to probe new directions to activate even or rather the old direction. A Goldarsky front attack on Yezno Domodetovskaya.